Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is our fourth What the Fork Digitalk by AgFunder, a series of webinars that we have created to help our investors and our community at large navigate the impact of COVID-19 on our industry. I'm Louisa Burwood-Taylor, AgFunder's Head of Media and Research. And so for today's session, I'm really excited. We're going to focus on ESG and impact investing in agri-food. It probably seems like many moons ago for most of us, but back in January of this year, ESG was fast becoming the phrase of 2020 when it came to investing across the investment landscape. For many of us, this was a long time coming, but it's not to mean it wasn't, welcome to see huge investment firms, the likes of BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, start to respond to demands from investors and overall necessity to tune their portfolios more towards environmental, social, and governance outcomes. When announcing the intention for BlackRock to put sustainability at the heart of its investment process, the CEO that argued that climate change could lead to a fundamental reshaping of finance. So it's big, big words. So now us working in agri-food, an industry that feeds the world, employs the majority of the workforce in many nations and contributes to 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions behind transport, it's clear that agri-food investing has the potential to play a big role in improving the sustainability of our planet. And technology is a key part of making that happen. But it's still surprisingly nascent as an impact investment route. And amazingly, many food and agriculture corporations are only just now creating sustainability initiatives. So joining me today to dig in further and think about the potential impact of COVID-19 on sustainability and impact investment, we have a great lineup, including Beverley Postma, the soon-to-be CEO of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil and the founder of the advocacy group Food Industry Asia, Bradley Busetto, the director of the United Nations Development Programme's Global Centre on Technology, Innovation and Sustainable Development, and my colleague Michael Dean, who's the founding partner of AgFunder and the lead on our impact investment initiative. So a quick bit of housekeeping. Please submit questions throughout the conversation and I'll try to weave them in where appropriate, and we can also have a decent Q&A session at the end. And I'll also be putting out a couple of polls, so it'd be great if people could respond to those. So thank you all so much for joining. Beverley, I'd love to start with you, thinking about your experience and history in the food industry. Why do you think it's taken so long for the food and agriculture industry to think seriously about sustainability and ESG?
Well, thank you very much, Louisa, and it's great to be online with you all. I suppose I don't see that we have taken a long time. I think the jargon has changed. Sustainability wasn't a word when I was a graduate searching for a sustainable job in food. And I think big business has always been at the forefront of driving change, but mainly because there's always been a cohort of consumers that demand a more fair and equitable world. And I sometimes I like to move beyond the acronyms and the jargon. They're helpful in certain dialogue, but at the end of the day, sustainability is just our world's desire to address some of these big disparities that we see in fairness and equity. So have we taken a long time in food? We're certainly not pulling our share, and we're certainly not doing enough. And the gap is widening instead of shrinking, but have we taken a long time to get there? I don't think so. I think we've been trying many, many things for many, many years. And I've always been proud to work for the companies that are leading in that space, albeit with a very difficult sort of stakeholder mix around them. And the one thing that I've learned is that no one organization or sector can do it alone. If we're going to move the dial on this thing, we have to do it collaboratively. Everyone has to get a win out of it. Everyone has to be focused on the same goal. And we have to close some of the silos that have emerged between our various sectors.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I mean, you've been focused on making a positive impact in agriculture for decades now. Sorry if I'm showing your age, but you
not quite that long ago, is it? But
But you had a particular experience in Mali with a project that you ran there called Seed Rock. Where was ESG back then?
Yeah, it wasn't a great deal. I mean, we were on the ground. There was quite a few sort of programs that were being implemented by the various UN organizations. But we, our view was to try and get, really try and get smallholder farmers producing crops that were going to be profitable for them and to increase their income so they could then go on and farm more land. The areas we were operating in Burkina Faso and Mali were mainly focused on cotton production. So there was a lot of pesticides being used, and you would see people walking through the cotton fields spraying, and it was just going, pregnant women, in fact, it was just, going everywhere. These chemicals, didn't even know what they were, hate to think. So we were decided to import hybrid sunflowers that were going to be pest resistant. Obviously, they weren't native to the area, so there was limited bugs that could attack them. So the idea was to try and to eliminate those sort of inputs in the supply chain, in the production process for these guys. Buy the seeds off them, process. We built a processing plant. We were selling oil into the local market, but ultimately geopolitical risk took over. But it was interesting in the process. As I said, we had 1,500 local farmers working for us. And the first couple of years, we had what we call farmer managers who we trained up, and they had a region each that would go out and teach the farmers how to grow sunflowers and the process. And we ended up having to replace them all with women, because we found that the women didn't take any talk back from the men. They'd go out and say, "Why haven't you done this?" If it was a male, they tended to be friendly and they'd sit under a tree and chat. When we got the women on board, they really cracked the whip and made a big difference. So we think we're pretty trailblazing back then, trying to get more women involved, promoting equality in the farming system in Burkina Faso and Mali.
Interesting. And Bradley, thinking about how corporations are now trying to create sustainability initiatives in food and agriculture, do you think, I'm sure that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are really playing a role in helping them to form those initiatives? Do you think that before there were the SDGs, that was a struggle for corporations to work out exactly how to tread that path?
I think that you're right. I mean, I think it just really simply, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are essentially like a to-do list for the planet, right? If we don't do these things, we don't have a planet that's really viable, a world that's really viable for future generations. So it's pretty simple when you think about it in that sense. So I think it is compelling that all nations of the world have signed up to this, right? And it's not just about sort of developing world versus developed world. So I think also just in your introduction, you pointed out some of them, how some of the big financial firms are getting behind sustainability, and think about that way. Sort of a couple of years ago, Mizuno, who was the guy until recently running the world's largest, I think, pool of money through the Japanese pension fund, $1.7 trillion. He made this really sort of shifting an oil tanker kind of shift to move their investments to an ESG strategy. And that really triggered even folks like BlackRock, right? But the way he did it and the way he argued it with the constituents and conservative shareholders was that, look, it's a pension fund. It's all about long-term. It's all about sustainability. Sustainability is inherent in wanting to have good returns over long-term, right? So in other words, there's no distinction between sustainability and not making a good return on investment. But I think the other thing, so that's happening at the really high-end financial level. But the thing that's really driving things now is at the consumer level, right? At the person level, especially in the West, I guess, but everywhere. It's this Generation Z or Generation Z, depending on where you're from, that are making decisions about their life based on sustainability, right? Like, making decisions about what foods they eat, where they shop, where they're going to work. This is, there are all sorts of data on this. Essentially, the first generation that's making critical decisions like this about life and work and income based on sustainability. So if you've got that driver too, then I think it just makes a lot of sense. And so I think, it's not about sort of lumping on sustainability to a corporation, but having sustainability be the engine or driver behind their business, right? In
Right.
the long run.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
stop
great.
there.
That's yeah, great point about the consumer making demands on the food companies to give them products that are more sustainable. Beverley, how have you seen that? How have you seen that develop? That consumer demand piece.
Yeah. Bradley, I think you've really you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, if there's one thing I've really witnessed over the decade, is the rise of the purpose-led consumer, who is demanding not just purpose in their own lives and careers, but purpose behind the products that they buy and the companies they buy them from. And again, this concept of a purpose-led career or a purpose-led business is a relatively new brand, but I think it's a truly exciting brand. And you know, millennials might get a lot of bad press, but I have to say they are leading the way and demanding that their employers, their brands, their companies truly live up to something more than just paying their mortgage every day. And you know, I've been so humbled by being invited into big companies to talk about what does purpose-led leadership mean? How do you find your purpose? And at first I was a bit skeptical because as sort of a Gen X, I'd never really thought about my life needing purpose. You know, I just wake up in the morning, do what makes me feel happy. But ultimately what I'm realizing is we're all pursuing some degree of purpose, and we play to our strengths in different ways. But what these younger consumers are looking for right now is companies to demonstrate to them that they are actually contributing to a world that's outside of the product that they're immediately selling to them. And the great thing about food is the digitalization of food has allowed us to see both ends of that value chain quite visibly for the first time. You know, one of the challenges with food is that it's not accessible across the whole value chain to your everyday shopper. You know, I was lucky. I grew up on a farm not too far away from where these sheep are. My father sent me this photo from his walk a few days ago in Yorkshire, in England, and I never thought I'd miss sheep. I was the farmer's daughter that wanted to get away from the farm. But actually, when you can't get home to see your family, you suddenly realize, I do miss this. I miss this pastoral landscape, and I don't see it in Singapore. And I think one of the challenges we have to overcome is the connectivity of food. You know, people tend to care more about things when they see it every day. And if you're buying your food from a supermarket, you don't see the field, you don't see the Africa. You know, Louisa's got I think a tea plantation somewhere in Africa. You don't see that. That's not your everyday reality. But the great thing about digitalization is that we can see it now. You know, we can't just see it every day, but we can prove transparency using technology like blockchain and bringing the supply chain to life for consumers. And I'm excited because consumers are truly starting to demand that level of transparency. It starts with trust, it starts with food safety. We all know that the number one purchase driver after price is food safety. People want their food to be safe. But more and more they're adding on to that wish list of what they demand from their company, from their supplier. They also want to know that there's some social impact involved, or no negative social impact involved in what they're buying. They want to see where their food has come from, who has produced it, has it been produced fairly, and is it good for the environment? Is it doing more harm than good? So I think companies are having to be quite innovative, not in just making commitments and keeping to them, but also being innovative in the way they bring that to life to their consumer, who's demanding that level of transparency. So right now, I see the real opportunity is in capturing the innovation within the supply chain and making it more transparent. So a consumer that is quite hungry right now for that type of reassurance.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a great comment here from one of the attendees that's asking, you know, about where should consumers make the right demand. So it sounds like, you know, from what you're saying, Bev and Bradley, that consumers are generally asking for more information about where their food comes from. They're generally asking for more sustainability. But are there some more specific demands that they should be putting to the industry? You know, bearing in mind that convenience and cost are going to be some of the biggest challenges for sustainability in agriculture. This is a question from Marvin Bowl. Thanks for that.
Was that to me?
Yeah, you could start. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And I think, we are dealing in this unprecedented universe of, I hate to use the term, but fake news. Trust is going to become a very valuable quotient in the future, because it's not just where do I look, it's do I trust it when I get there. And so I do think, and I'm not just saying this because I'm about to lead a certification scheme, but I do think the role of certification and independent verification is we're going to see more of that. We're sadly in a world where we just can't take the word of everyone that they're doing the right thing. We do need, I think, to put in place more transparency that's independently audited and verified. So the first thing is, I think we will see the rise of the certification scheme. I think the second thing, and probably more importantly though, we will see the rise of purpose-led leaders who won't just lead as a purpose-led leader, but will actually translate that purpose into their business. And this is a difficult translation. We've seen some amazing purpose-led leaders rise to CEO level, but have we actually seen that purpose penetrate throughout the DNA of their business model? I'm not going to name names, but I've witnessed some incredible evangelists who have definitely moved the dial on sustainability within the food sector. But I'm not sure they've been as successful as they would have liked to have been in actually translating that into every part of their business model. And it's difficult. You can't easily retrofit sustainability on a business model that wasn't set up for that in the first place. What I am excited about, though, is the new startups that are not just starting with a purpose-led leader, they are starting with sustainability as the DNA of their business model. I think, AgriFunder is one of them. AgFunder is one of them. It's a new business that started not just with a leader that believes in sustainability, but was prepared to put that through the DNA of the company. There are some companies that are managing to translate that, but it's tough. It needs your stakeholder buy-in at the highest level, and shareholder buy-in on sustainability is one of the hardest things that you can get as a CEO of a multinational company. You can be a purpose-led CEO, but can you get the investors behind you to allow you to translate that purpose into every piece of your business? And it's difficult. So I do think we're going to see customers demanding more purpose-led business. And for that, we're going to need more brave, bold leaders, and we're going to need more brave, bold investors.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, Bradley, I'd love for you to pick up and talk about the work that you're doing at UNDP in applying the SDGs to technology and innovation, as Beverley pointed out. And we're getting a few questions already asking, which technologies really can have an impact on improving sustainability.
Sure. Thanks. And again, thanks to all of you for having me here. So one of the things we launched early on, well, our center here is very much a startup too, but last year, especially after Singapore announced its 30 by 30 initiative, in other words, they want to get to 30% food security by 2030, we instantly got together with Singapore and some partners, including with AgFunder and others, to put together something pretty unique in the UN system, essentially a global innovation initiative around sustainable and digital agriculture, where the idea was to respond to challenges from the developing world. So we went out and selected 12 countries in the developing world across Africa and Asia mostly, and then put together an initiative to get startups and R&Ds to respond to these challenges around urban agriculture, around rain-fed agriculture, and so forth. And it's been amazing. We've now surfaced 30 to 35 startups and R&Ds and maybe more mature companies. And the overall idea is to bring these technologies, most of them already kind of exist in one way or another, and make them scale. Maybe across a country or across a region or maybe globally. Well, that's kind of hard, but some of those technologies are around like digital farming. So using digital farming to reduce inputs, more efficient outputs. There's a company called Biops out of Indonesia. There are others, Crop In from the Philippines. It's really doing really interesting work in this space. So that can help certainly with sustainability and reducing inputs, reducing cost. Geospatial data for managing pastures, for example. I know blockchain's an overused word, but that's or whatever, or too loaded word almost these days still. But using blockchain for traceability, this is really important for consumers, and not just you know, like the heavy hitters in the value chain along the way, but for consumers too, to understand where, you know, where the food is coming from at every point. So using that for traceability, we think has lots of potential too. So you know, we're particular, you know, and then there's the question of how is, you know, I want to talk about this for a minute. I mean, so we launched this before the pandemic, right? But I think it's even more important now with the pandemic. So a couple of weeks ago, the CEO of Microsoft said, you know, this pandemic has essentially turned 2 years worth of digital transformation. Well, we've basically accomplished 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. What he meant was that, you know, now all of a sudden we have digital tools to work from home, to learn from home. So to do so many things digitally, to do, you know, healthcare digitally, it's all just ramped up. So how is this going to impact, if we were already trying to work on digitalizing agriculture because we thought that that could also be more sustainable, lower cost, provide more benefit to farmers too, not just to big firms. What's this this acceleration of digitalization? How's that going to impact the aim of creating more sustainable agriculture at scale? I'm hopeful that the net effect is that it helps, but I'd also like to hear from panelists on this and also from investors that are on the line. So I think in a sense, you know, the story in Africa is bad right now, and it's getting worse because of the pandemic in terms of the food supply. Like first time in history, both the supply side and demand side are getting crippled, right? But you know, actually the question I want to put out there is that how can digitalization of agriculture and these new technologies help this right now? How can it help reconnect, in a sense, the supply chain, for example? But maybe it's a question for the panelists, but also for those who are in on the call. It's one that really interests me. I think it's a critical one, right, for investors and kind of for the world right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, as we've seen with the impact of COVID, supply chains have been disrupted. We've seen, you know, get thousands of gallons of milk being poured down the drain because channels to market have been blocked. No one can go and buy from their coffee shop, but there was no way to redirect this product into supermarkets, for example, in a very sort of time efficient way. So I think sort of digitization across the supply chain to rationalize it so that we can have early insight into what demand levels are looking like, I think is important. And I know there's startups working in those areas. But I think, you know, just coming back to, you know, what's going to drive this, totally agree that consumer is a key driver of this. But I think we're going to start seeing, and we already are, but we're going to start seeing a lot more from institutional investors driving the adoption of ESG principles for their investee companies. And how that sort of materializes is, you know, is up for debate. But even thinking in Western markets around, you know, water use, land degradation, pollution, overuse of pesticides, you know, these are things that are not just happening in emerging markets. It's a global phenomenon. So, you know, we're hearing from institutional investors who are saying, look, we are really thinking about this from an asset protection perspective, asset management. So we're looking to allocate capital into companies that are going to protect us because they are thinking about the future, and not just the immediate future, the long-term future. And, you know, you look at climate science, it's just clear. Even the modeling around a 1.5 degree increase over the next few decades means that our supply chains and our production systems are going to be changed fundamentally. And they're not just going to be changed short term, they're going to be changed long term. So what do we do to deal with this? And you know, I think technology is the only way we're going to get there. And applying these new technologies, and that's why, you know, that's why I think the investor is going to drive a lot of this, because backing these sort of moonshots are really what we need now. The science is pretty clear that we need moonshots to really sort of get to a point where we're going to be sustainably producing food for the number of people we've got on the planet. I don't know, sorry. It's I think it's a real challenge we've got.
Sorry, I was
Louisa,
on mute then for a second.
you.
Yeah, I was on mute for a second. So thinking a bit about the metrics using to measure, obviously in the impact investing world, there are a few different metrics that can be used. And I know that with you know, our impact investment initiative at AgFunder, we're thinking about the different metrics that we can use to apply to agri-food tech. You know, as I mentioned before, it's not a well-trodden path. There are metrics around smallholder farmers, for instance, and investments there. But across the whole supply chain, there isn't necessarily, particularly outside of emerging markets. Can you just talk through a few of our portfolio companies that, you know, could be applied to some impact metrics or to the SDGs, Michael, to give a few examples to the audience?
Sure, we're using the SDGs as our sort of reference point and our touch point for what sort of impact these companies can provide. And companies like you know, WeFarm, for example, who have developed a social media app that helps farmers discuss with one another what diseases they might have on their crops. That's leading into a marketplace where they're able to get access to high quality inputs, for example. So they're sort of really helping to drive benefit to smallholder farmers, not only through the knowledge base, a shared knowledge base, but also access to inputs that otherwise might not be available to them. You know, ensuring that they're of sufficient quality. Companies like Designate, who are operating in India with, you know, over 200,000 farmers in their system, providing a streamlined supply chain with purchases, distribution hubs, so that they can ensure that these farmers can get what they need when they need it. They know what they're doing. They get advice on growing their crops. So really sort of helping to drive efficiencies in those supply chains. So there are a couple of emerging market examples, but even companies that are you know, looking at producing sustainable products around different types of alternative proteins, for example, black sheep, who are utilizing different ingredients that may not be part of the commodity supply chain to develop really tasty alternative protein products. So the range is very broad. I don't think we have to, you know, just be focusing in on what's going to be impactful for smallholders. I think right across the global food system, there's opportunities there, opportunities that abound.
Beverley, what are your thoughts on the implementation of technology to, you know, an advanced sustainability goals for food companies?
I think one of the seismic shifts I've seen is the merging of tech and food. You know, we've been a very closed sector. Agri-food doesn't tend to play well with others, and others don't tend to play well with us. And that's, you know, that's a product of the sector being very complex and quite difficult and challenging, with very low bottom lines, as well as it being a very political sector. Food is very political. You know, everyone has an opinion on food. Governments trade food. It's a difficult sector to invest in. But what I've seen is this acceleration, thanks to a couple of high-placed unicorns. I've seen this acceleration of interest in atypical innovators and atypical investors who are shaking things up a bit. And I, you know, it's a dream come true for me, because I've always believed that we need to demystify food and ag. It's at the heart that the standard business models that work for pretty much any other product work for food. We only have to see, you know, the stratospheric rise of the Beyond Meats and the Impossibles and the, you know, the unicorns in the alternative protein space. If you just apply the good old principles of quality, taste, price, you know, you're going to get it right if you put some marketing effort behind it. And I don't want to dumb that down. That was decades of business planning and very, very good strategic design. But if we bring some thinking from the tech world and the finance world into food, I just think we can move the dial so much faster by challenging ourselves to apply some of these principles to, you know, a sector that's lagging in applying some of these innovations. At the end of the day, we need to demystify the idea of the smallholder farmer. Let's not romanticize the smallholder farmer. The smallholder farmer is a small business. It's no different from any small business that is just trying to make a bit of profit and make a little bit more profit, usually led by a woman, because the vast majority of small holdings, certainly in Asia and Africa, are run by women, because the men are often away working in the mines or doing a job that pays a more steady salary. Remember, farming is a subsistence living for many people. They plant what they have that year, they harvest it, they eat what they produce, and they sell any surplus. But they're still a business. They're trying to make a bit more surplus so that they have enough to put in the bank and send the kids to school and buy malaria tablets and all the sort of usual human desires that we all want. So I think we've got to start remembering that the tools that apply to any customer apply to farmers. We need to work hard at understanding what do they need. And one of the challenges with this pandemic is that they're less accessible while we can't travel. It's harder for us sitting in cities to innovate for the farmer when we can't actually get on the farm and ask them, what do you need right now? But I think that's where we're seeing the positive is in digital education platforms are becoming incredibly simple. They're becoming very, very accessible, low bandwidth digital education platforms, including the one we're on, I think will be a vital accelerator in transferring some of these innovations and technologies into the hands of farmers that need them. You know, I've always said, I don't know that we lack innovation, or we don't lack technology in agriculture. One of our challenges is we lack the ability to transfer it to small businesses that need it most. You know, there's plenty of great technology out there. Where the true innovation lies in how do you get it to and scale it to the farmers that can actually then start making a profit out of using that technology. So I'm excited about drone technology. I'm excited about big data platforms. I'm excited about low bandwidth education platforms. I'm excited about any technology that's scalable and can get existing solutions to more people. And I think that's where we've got to be careful not to overcomplicate our solutions right now. Scalability, and I learned this from working in FMCG companies, scalability is usually looking at your lowest common denominator and scaling it. And how do you do that rather than over-innovating every part of the supply chain? So I'm excited to see that the lead farmers, those that have always been early adopters of technology, are coming online. They're using their confinement at the moment to educate themselves and their families. And so I think we need to embrace this moment and share the knowledge, share the information we have. And, you know, I saw this when I was working for Harvest Plus, working with smallholders in sub-Saharan Africa and here in Asia, in Bangladesh and in India. You know, there's a hunger for knowledge. Every farmer, like every businessman, wants to know what the guy next door is doing to earn a bit more. You know, everyone is human. Ultimately, we all want to improve our piece of business. It's just a question of making sure that we're truly challenging ourselves as solution providers. Are we reaching people we need to reach in a way that they can access that technology? So I'm excited to see that the truly scalable solutions will be the ones that get into the hands of enough farmers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's, you know, that's not unique to emerging markets. I think the adoption piece and the business model is something that's across ag tech, in fact. But Bradley, I saw you put your hand up, and we did have a question from someone in the audience, particularly asking around this, you know, this piece of affordability of technology.
Sure. Oh, well, just to, you know, maybe it gets to that point. So a couple of points. I think this tech transfer point is really hugely important, especially in the developing world, right? And especially now with the pandemic, where folks are more disconnected in a sense than ever, and supply chains are disrupted. How do we work with investors, like folks that are on this call, to make sure that their technologies are not just sort of made for the developed world, but can really be applied and rolled out to the developing world? Think about a particular pain point, right? Like a particular pain point right now are agriculture centers, service centers in Africa, right? There aren't the seeds or fertilizers and so forth. There's not the information on market data and prices because it's disrupted, right? So one of the technologies that we've serviced is simply a chat bot that connects farmers in Kenya, for example, with service centers in a better way so that they can figure that out, right? So that's like a really micro kind of easy fix one. But then I wanted to also talk about how technology is driving sustainability in the broader food chain too, like value chain. There's a company called Footprint and how they can be successful, right? And how it can be completely integrated within the company. There's a company called Footprint out of the US that is trying to revolutionize food packaging in supermarkets and just wherever, right? And so they've created an alternative to single-use plastic, right? That's core thing is sustainability. So it's a new polymer, new sort of substance material that degrades, and their customers are, include McDonald's, include Conagra, PepsiCo. So that's an example of something that's a real game changer, right? That's a unicorn in the space too, but a different angle, right? Of the part of the overall value chain, I guess.
Yeah, we lost Michael momentarily. I think he's logging back on. The Australian internet is not always our friend.
Yeah, I had better internet in Burkina Faso and Mali, to be honest. So my apologies for that.
Good.
There, you're back.
Unbelievable.
Back again.
Yeah, sorry, everyone.
But we have loads of questions coming in now, so I think I'm going to start cracking on with those. And for starting, Michael, with you, there's a question around metrics, and also this is also, I think, for you as well, Bradley. But our Susanna Hannasorrell is asking what exact metrics and methodologies you use and how you measure them. Is it digitally or otherwise? Perhaps you can talk us through that.
Michael, do you want to give it a shot first, and then I can jump in?
Sure, yeah. So as I said, we're referencing the Sustainable Development Goals. So when we're looking at making an investment, it's really going to be focused on what the impact will be as a result of the technology. We're a technology investor, right? So it's going to be really sort of driven into which Sustainable Development Goals are we addressing, which ones are going to be applicable through the technology, and then how do we measure that? How do we monitor that? There's going to be a lot of, obviously, as these are digital technologies usually, we're going to be able to take data from what's happening on the ground. So if they're sort of addressing smallholder farmers, how are we able to measure the impact that we're talking about? So if we're talking about getting, for example, a smallholder getting a crop out before the rains come, which anecdotally or historically would by doing that would increase his yield by 12% or 15% or whatever it is. That's the sort of monitoring that we'll be doing. Supply chain, obviously, what are the benefits of this technology in rationalizing the supply chain? Have we got situations where a farmer is able to get his product to market when he otherwise wouldn't have? Just really sort of doing a deep dive into what the potential and actual impacts can be. It's still a bit of an imprecise science, to be honest. There's a lot of very expensive consultants who will come in and do a on-the-ground deep dive. If you sort of value investing in early stage agri-food tech, it's very, very difficult to warrant that sort of expenditure in order to get a really granular insight into what's happening. But we think that just through the tools that we'll have, the tools we have available to us, we'll be able to really demonstrate verifiable impacts and sort of materially be able to report exactly what's happening as a result of these technologies.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, there'd be other metrics too that could be relevant, like of course impact on the environment, impact on water usage, just the inputs and outputs to metrics around inclusivity, meaning are women engaged as well as men, and that sort of thing. So it could really vary. One thing that the UN can help do, besides the kind of convening authority that we have, because we're just present like in 170 different countries, but we can also, what we also do is we help folks, both governments and companies, work out their impact measurement strategies, right? Probably one of the most important things we do is help governments and societies overall figure out how they're going to achieve their sustainable development goals. So we've got really detailed methodologies that are focused and tailored to each kind of constituent, whether it's a company, whether it's a government, whether it's a city or something. But yeah.
Okay, great. So Beverley, we had quite a few follow-up questions to the conversation we were having around consumers demanding more information about sustainability and how they do that and where they know how to focus. And I think, you bring up certification. A few of the audience were saying, but certification can be really complicated and can be very nuanced. And how can consumers, really understand that and engage with that? So perhaps you can comment a bit on that and how you see that becoming something that's an accessible tool for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you've got to decide where your business sits within that supply chain. Who is your customer? Because unless you are a B2C business, you're not actually going to be talking to the consumer. That's a very small part of the food and agriculture value chain. The real meat happens at the B2B piece along that supply chain, and that's where certification really comes in. It's not necessarily that the consumer wants to look under the hood and understand all the certification. They just want to trust the person that they're buying the food from. And that's where certification becomes a badge. So I think that certification is very nuanced, because all it does is that it allows, first of all, it at the very basic level, it's a box ticking exercise for your ESG. If you've made certain commitments in your ESG report and you are trying to demonstrate that you are reaching those commitments, one of the quickest, easiest ways to do that is to ensure that your product is from a certified value chain. It's like a shortcut to having to do the inspections yourself and check that you are actually doing what you said you were going to do for your consumer. So I think, you can think of certification as a metric. It's part of measuring what you are committing and hopefully doing and saying you're doing. Now, it's very hard for you to get out and visibly see and check every single part of your value chain to make sure that everyone is doing, meeting your procurement guidelines. But if you've got a certification business that takes that burden from you, then at least that adds that layer of trust. So I do think we've got to, again, think about who our customer is, though. If the consumer is demanding transparency, but it's like demanding safety on an aeroplane. They don't want to understand how every piece of that engine works. They just want to know that there is someone that has figured that out for them and is trustworthy enough to say, we've got your safety covered. I mean, when I get on an airplane, I choose the brands because I know it's safe. I don't have to read the manual on how the engine was designed. I know some people might want to, but that's not my thing. But I think food is the same. We've got to just give people confidence that we care about this stuff. ESG is not just a box ticking exercise. If it is, there will always be rogues within that mix. It comes back down to, do you genuinely believe in those commitments? Are you actually waking up every morning and saying, well, the decision I make today to make this piece of equipment or to sell this, this new ingredient, does it help or hinder the move to a more fair and equitable world? Does it hit my commitments for planet, people, and profitability? And I think if you're not asking those things every day as a business, then you can't describe yourself as a purpose-led business. You could probably make some money out of it, but it's short term, and the consumer of tomorrow is going to demand more of you than just checking whether you've submitted your ESG report on time. So I do think that certification will play a role, but it doesn't, you know, you need to understand it if you're part of that value chain, but your consumer doesn't have to understand every nuance of certification. They just want to know someone's checked and that they trust the person that's checked.
And a question from Melissa Bear, so following on from that, is asking, you know, your certification can cost money, but are there other tools for different types of ag products to verify the claims that they're making, or to market the way that they're doing things, which doesn't involve certification? She pointed out that its certification has failed in poultry and dairy. So wondering about what other tools could producers use?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of options. We're seeing a lot more integrated value chains. So we're seeing businesses that own the whole value chain. You know, it sort of was popular back in the 90s. It went away again, and it's coming back. And, you know, I think what we're going to see with COVID is the acceleration of some trends that were already on the rise, and the delay of other trends. And I think good business investors at the moment will be able to identify which trends are going to naturally accelerate as a result of COVID, and which are going to just be on hold for a while. I don't think they'll go away. I mean, two of the things we've seen is this immediate shift from an environmental sensitivity to social impact sensitivity. You know, one thing that COVID has done is made us all think about people a lot more. You know, whether we're more connected to our own families, whether we're more connected to our employees and our teams in their own homes. It's a very, I don't know about you, but I'm finding every call starts with a very people-centered conversation. How's everyone doing? You know, have you had your hair cut yet? It's a very human time of life right now. And I think we, again, to take the acronym away and put the words back in, we started off measuring environmental sustainability and financial stability and governance, but we forget there's an S in that. Social impact and social sustainability is as important, if not more important, than many of the other elements of sustainability. And what I think is that businesses that aren't focusing on their social impact right now, their obligation to their staff, their obligation to their workforce, the obligation to the workforce in their downstream and upstream supply chains, those are the ones that might fall foul of a consumer that is very, very aware of social impact right now. So, you know, do you need certification to know that you're treating your employees right? Do you need certification to know that you're paying your suppliers sufficient to have an income at the end of the day? Do you need certification to check that you are actually doing the right thing by the planet? I don't know that we can always just rely on certification as the backstop. Sometimes we just have to challenge ourselves to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And what we've proved, if anything COVID has done, is proved that sustainable business is profitable business, because the businesses that were walking the talk of social impacts, the Patagonias of this world, the businesses that actually did the right thing by their people right from the beginning, because they already had those processes in place. I think they're going to come out as stronger businesses financially as a result of this crisis, because they had those values right built into their business model from day one. The businesses that just issued a few good sounding PR statements and are now furloughing all of their staff and laying them all off, I don't know that they will survive so much. You know, that history will pan out there. We don't need certification for the less complex value chains. I think where you need certification is for value chains that are relying on lots and lots of very small components, where as a business manager, you can't get out onto every farm. You can't check in every factory. You know, you've got to rely on some scalable way of verifying that your suppliers are doing what you believe they should be. but it's not the be all and end all. Ultimately, it's about making the right decisions in the first place and waking up every morning and saying, am I doing the right thing by the people that I employ and the people that I buy from?
Great, thank you for that. So a question that's coming up from a few different audience members, and here's one from Tyler Capson around investing in this space and measuring impact, talking about how much of a balance between the sustainability drive of impact investing and the commercial viability do investors really look for? Someone like BlackRock is not going to purely invest on principle. So how do you show that balance between that commercial viability and that impact without one discrediting the other? I think this is a really interesting question, because impact investing used to be very much, people would think that it was sacrificing investment returns, but the current wave of impact investing is very much focused on double bottom line or triple bottom line. Michael, can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a key component of this, and of course it depends on the technology concerned, but customer adoption's, a crucial component of this. If your customer, whether that be a smallholder farmer, whether it be a transport company or a major supermarket, if they're adopting your technology, it usually means that you're introducing efficiencies of some sort, or other benefits. So, looking at, and that's the the never-ending question for an investor is what opportunity we're going to invest in that is going to hit the road running and really sort of be a moonshot that's going to deliver returns that we want. Obviously, if you can marry the two, that's crucial. But I think that from our perspective, looking at technologies that are going to be impactful will in many cases mean technologies that are going to deliver profitability for their customers, because they're sustainable in that they are delivering some sort of benefit, whether that be an efficiency around cost of fuel or number of or amount of water they use on their crop, or how long something is on the shelf before it's thrown out in waste. Those efficiency drives that these technologies bring really give you a good insight into how sustainable they are in their impact.
I've got a question for you, Bradley.
Yeah.
How can FMCG companies, which still rely very heavily on plastic packaging, so examples are sugary beverage and processed food companies, take the first step towards a more sustainable future?
Sure. I think the example I used before of that company called Footprint that is introducing, I think Rob was one of the folks who asked a similar question about innovation and how can you scale it. And I think, so they can adopt things that aren't about single-use plastic, right? And you're seeing that at the small scale here in Singapore too, like at the hawker centers that don't distribute any more plastic straws and things like that. But you can opt out. There are commercially viable options now, like the company I mentioned, Footprint's technology for compostable new versions of plastic, in a sense, so new compounds. And right here in Southeast Asia, right here in Singapore, there are a lot of companies that are into this space. So it can happen. I wanted to talk about that question though, about how to drive innovation, and how to get a whole ecosystem incentivized to drive that. Some of that is going to come organically through consumers and the markets and demand for it, right? And you're seeing that in places like Singapore and California or wherever, places that are really into sustainability, let's say. But also, sure, I mean, you're going to need some government incentives too, especially in the food and agriculture space. You're seeing this in the EU, where the EU is specifically incentivizing through grants or tax breaks or whatever, companies that are practicing a more sustainable version of agriculture, or companies that help manufacture technologies that get that done. So that's happening. In Singapore, the Singapore example might be through SG Innovate, which is very much focused on sustainability with their deep tech technologies as well, even in food tech and agri-tech. So it's happening, but it has to be kind of I guess you have to be fortunate enough to have the potential of such incentives and subsidies and so forth. I mean, in the developing world, that's really hard unless, you know, to some extent, the big multilaterals like the World Banks and UN to some extent can help in the developing world, but there has to be a kind of a more than just market to accelerate these adoptions of innovation. And so there has to be, in my view, some sort of intervention and a positive intervention. Yes.
Okay, COVID related question, and we're definitely running out of time, but try and get through as many as we can. From Jai Hyun Park, so thanks for the question. Because of the food supply disruptions due to the pandemic, people are questioning whether the globalized food supply chain is truly sustainable. As a natural reaction, there is a demand to regionalize the supply chain to bring production physically closer to the end users. Do the panelists see this as a permanent trend, or can we overcome this with technology?
Well, if I can jump in again, I mean, I can jump in again. I think this is kind of what I talked about in the beginning. I mean, the impact of this pandemic on digitalization and just changing the world more dramatically. I mean, I think the commenter is making a super point that I think these might be permanent or semi-permanent changes, right? But maybe changes that are accelerating changes that were already underway, right? Like thinking about in big cities, how do you do urban agriculture in a city like Singapore even, or a city like Lagos in Africa on the other side of the sort of income and or income disparity spectrum. But you're gonna, I think it's gonna drive more localization of agriculture, regionalization maybe too, for sure. And that's probably good for sustainability.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to see the end of globalization. I mean, there's no way everyone's going to be growing and producing everything they need. It's globalization drives efficiencies, and that's incredibly important. But I agree. I think we're going to see more local growing, more sustainable local production, particularly of fresh vegetables, for example. And of course, when we get the scale and the cost down, alternative proteins and cellular agriculture, I think is going to be an important driver for protein production in cities as well.
So I have a few questions asking from different regions, some focused on sub-Saharan Africa, some on Southeast Asia, but really asking this question about how to drive technology adoption. I know we slightly covered it before, but are there any other examples and thinking about some business models that work? Michael, I think you might have tapped out for that part of the conversation. So maybe you can chime in. I mean, that adoption piece is the big question in ag tech all over the world.
It's really hard. Yeah. Sorry.
It is. Yeah, I agree with Beverley. I think one of the key points is we're going to need involvement of governments and multilaterals, as Bradley said. We need infrastructure to be able to fully digitize the supply chain. I know that a lot of places do have access to smartphones and things, but it needs to continue progressing, and so. Regulatory reform is going to be required, but also spending money on infrastructure to allow these things to happen, in my view.
Yeah, just to add to that point of the role of governments, I mean, there's so many ways that if you are as a business, you're not tapped into government policy at the moment, now's the time to do it. The government will be a driver of trend. There will be a customer for short term and a long term coming out of this crisis. I believe that food is truly global and it will stay global. We can't feed the planet with a protectionist and self-sufficient model in every country. So a degree of globalization is here to stay. But governments are going to play a very, very big short-term and long-term role in that. And as a business, if you want to know where the opportunity is right now, watch where these government trade deals are going to happen. Look at the opening up of countries and products. We're seeing a huge amount of politically motivated protectionism of governments trying to protect their own supply chains. And, will that backfire? I think what I'd want to do is see which countries are keeping their supply chains open, who are actively seeking foreign policy, that are trading. I mean, Singapore is a great example right now. It's the most food secure country in the world, but it is the least secure in terms of self-sufficiency. So Singapore is actively doing deals with New Zealand and with Australia and other countries to make sure that green corridor stays open right now, that the 70% of food that they're not going to be able to produce themselves still keeps coming in from third countries. So I would be looking at where those deals are happening, because that's where the immediate opportunity will be for emerging markets at the moment. For the Africa technology and Asia technology transfer, it's sort of a case of not trying to do it alone. You know, if you're trying to carve out a new business with a smallholder farmer, it's very difficult to do that the other side of the world. You know, you have to collaborate to get access to these farmers. There are NGO hubs and government supported initiatives that can be your customer. They can be your vector to getting your technology to the farmer. They're hungry for technology. And, you know, looking at work that the Gates Foundation is doing, looking at some of the big aid programs, the British DFID program, USAID, they all have public-private partnership grant-supported initiatives that you can be part of. You can put your product onto their promotional machine and get product to smallholders. And UNDP is doing exactly that. They are connecting business ideas with the need in the field. And the UN agencies, you know, they're good at doing this. They've done it for a long time. So I think we've got to think more of the public sector as being a customer for some of this technology. And, you know, it might be cumbersome and clunky to work with the public sector, but right now they're on a deadline. The SDGs expire in 2030. We are in the last decade to meet those targets. Governments are being challenged to meet these targets. So more and more, they're going to be purchasing solutions from the private sector to help them. And I'll flag one initiative. You asked me for examples of work in Africa. The one that I love is an aggregator rental platform called Hello Tractor. And it's just one of the simplest and best ideas that I've seen. It's making people lots of money, and it's getting machinery and technology onto farms that just weren't mechanized before that platform became available. So there's my little plug.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, there's still a few people hanging on, which is great. So I'll carry on with a few more questions here. A few people are asking for some specific examples of technologies that can help farmers deal with increasingly extreme weather and also tropical climates, and thinking about how to reduce pesticide use in some of those climates. So can we give a few examples there?
Yeah, we're seeing seed genetics are driving a lot of this. Obviously, being able to grow food plants in marginal environments, and I mean that's a key risk with climate change is that we're seeing environments changing and becoming more marginal by the year, really. You know, using Australia as an example, they're somewhere in drought in Australia at any given time. So seed genetics, the ability, seed coatings, and planting technologies that are able to plant the seeds with what it needs to be able to germinate and at least get a start in life. Digitization around understanding exactly what's happening with the weather in a fairly granular detail at any given time. You know, a frost coming through a crop can be devastating. If you know it's coming, you can take action. Same thing with rain or hail. Understanding when these weather patterns are coming through and being able to either get your crop in or crop out, depending on your situation, are vital as well. And we're seeing more and more of those types of technologies being adopted. So there's plenty going on. Mechanical spraying, for example, automating spraying robots that are delivering an exact dose of whatever is needed. Obviously, biologically based antimicrobials and pesticides are also going to make an impact as well and help with pollution from agriculture runoff. So there's lots that's happening. I'm sure Bradley's got some other examples.
I think that those are great examples. No, it's a comprehensive list. Just on that question of tech transfer, and maybe just to send a shout out to the technologists on the call and the investors out there too who are interested in the developing world. I see one of our roles at the center, maybe the United Nations more broadly, especially in the deep field, is to help crowd in good solutions, right? And then help scale them up. So we're very much keen to bring in the technologies that have already been proven elsewhere, and not just creating something out of nothing, out of new, but to help you and help bring these technologies to different markets too, if they make sense and if they add to the sustainability of that country, that society, that community. Yeah, we can help do that. That's one of our roles is convening and putting those pieces together to do something good. So happy to work with those that are on the line to do that. I've actually got to run to another event right now. So I wanted to thanks to Michael, and thanks to Louisa for so capably moderating this, and thanks also to Bev. Fantastic discussion. And thanks to everybody with such good comments.